What it do, Dream Team? It's your boy Neal back with another reaction video, guys. Here we are with the USA Loves to Meddle in Other Countries Part 2. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to the channel, ring notification bell, get a video a thumbs up so it gets suggested. You guys got a favorite video suggestion, you can subscribe to Patreon or drop it in the comment section. What do you got?
Bananas taste the best and are the best for you.
All right, let's go to Africa. So it's 1960 here in the center of Africa, a country called Congo. They just gained independence from Belgium, and they have an election. And this guy, Patrice Lumumba, wins, becomes the prime minister. But immediately, over in Washington, the communist alarm bells instantly start sounding off. Because we're in the middle of the Cold War, and Congo is a place full of tons of natural resources, including loads of uranium, the main ingredient for nuclear bombs. This is at a time when Americans are keeping gas masks next to their bed and have hordes of canned goods in their basements. And officials in Washington can't risk Congo falling into the influence of the Soviet Union. So they start focusing on this prime minister. The CIA director called him, quote, an urgent and prime objective that should, quote, be a high priority of our covert action. So they pull a more political coup than the ones before. They start allying with Lumumba's political enemies and Congo's former colonizer Belgium. They bribe politicians, they fund protests and labor movements, and they circulate propaganda, similar ingredients to the previous coups. And when the moment is right, all these bribed politicians do what the CIA asked them to. They remove Lumumba from power. And the CIA is right there giving money and intelligence and advice to the new government. This political solution was actually not the first try. The CIA had tried to assassinate Lumumba in the past, but all of those attempts failed, which is why they turned to hijacking and manipulating Congolese politics, a brand new democracy, supporting the people who would eventually go on to put Lumumba in front of a Congolese and Belgian firing squad, making this effectively a political assassination, supported from an ocean away. And
this is insane to me, bro. Like, it's absolutely crazy, bro. I'm telling you, whoever has the most money has the most power. It's basically that simple, to be honest. Whoever has the most money has the most power.
And yet there's so much gray area in these coups. In this case, it's really tough to prove that the CIA's support was the key factor in Lumumba's assassination. It's debated to this day. An effective foreign-sponsored coup works like this, operating in the shadows, fueling divisions, appealing to the worst demons of the people on the ground, through money, through influence. All right, let's move on to the Caribbean in the 1960s. There's a brutal dictator here in the Dominican Republic. I mean, this guy's really bad. He's rumored to feed his opponents to sharks. But anyway, what the US cares about is that there's fear that a communist revolution could happen at any moment. So the CIA sends weapons to a group of hitmen who go assassinate this guy. It ends up being an ambush and a car chase. They're successful in taking him out, ending his 31-year rule. And eventually the US sends in forces to occupy the DR to make sure that a leftist candidate doesn't come to power. They restore order, and eventually a US-friendly candidate is elected.
Wow.
Okay, so now we have to head over to Vietnam in 1963. And boy, this is a way bigger one than we have time for, but we're trying to focus on the coup element of this. Vietnam was divided in two, between communist and pro-Western governments. The US needs the South to stay on their side, but Washington starts to lose confidence in this guy, the South's leader. He's losing a grip on the country, and the US fears that communism will take over the whole country of Vietnam. So the CIA rolls up its sleeves. It's time for another coup. This time they focus on a South Vietnamese general who also doesn't love the president, and he agrees to do the CIA's bidding. And when given the signal, the general directs his military to seize the airport and radio stations, and they block off highways. They march to the presidential palace. A bloody shootout goes down, and this president, President Diem, escapes. He happens to be with his brother, but it's not going well for them, so he realizes that he needs to set up a meeting to surrender. They're gonna meet at a Catholic church. This was probably gonna be a peaceful meeting, but when the generals arrive, they just kill him on the spot.
Of course.
Saying, quote, to kill the weed, you must pull up the roots. Meaning, in order to solve the problem, Diem must die. Exile was not enough. Now, the US actually didn't plan for this to happen. They didn't want to kill this guy. It was not an official order from Washington. But they made this coup happen. JFK is said to be really distraught about this. The first American Catholic president behind the coup that killed the first Vietnamese Catholic president. And incidentally, JFK was assassinated 20 days later. And one national security journalist argues that Diem's assassination actually had a greater impact on American history than the murder of JFK. Because it locked the US into a decade of conflict in Vietnam, which ballooned into a long war, ending in an embarrassing defeat and a political crisis at home. One of the few coups where the US actually had to deal with the aftermath.
Oh. I feel that. See, I wasn't alive during this time, and honestly, I didn't learn too much in school, so I feel this is all new information to me. This is absolutely wild. And the fact that Kennedy got assassinated 20 days after this assassination is crazy.
Okay, let's blast through a few of these really quickly. I'm gonna skirt over some details here. It's 1964 and Brazil is potentially veering off into communism with the rise of a new leftist leader. Lucky for the CIA, there's already a coup being plotted against him, so the US military just shows up with ships off the coast of Brazil. They airlift in a bunch of ammunition and supplies. They didn't end up having to do much, actually. Instead, they just stood by with reinforcements and watched the Brazilian coup go down. The leftist leader goes down and a new leader comes in. In 1973, there's a coup in Chile that is a very complicated story with conflicting accounts, and we went down a super deep rabbit hole, and we've decided that because the evidence is not rock solid, we're going to cut it for time, but definitely some crazy shit went down. I'm not saying it didn't. Okay, we're back in Africa, and it's the 80s, and over here in Libya, the dictator, Muammar Gaddafi, was making lots of trouble in the region, funding terrorist groups and working to expand his influence all over the region. Then he gets a call from his neighbor Chad asking for help against a rebellion. Gaddafi eagerly sends 4,000 troops to occupy a huge part of the country and makes friends with the new president by helping him exile his rival. And soon Gaddafi's getting greedy and threatening to merge Chad into Libya. The US is not into this. So Ronald Reagan fires up the well-oiled coup machine, launching a covert war, sending
the well-oiled coup machine,
weapons and cash to rebels in Chad, and supporting that political opponent who was ousted, helping him fight back. And it works. The president of Chad has to flee, and the US-backed and supported leader comes to power. And now there's a conflict, and the CIA continues arming the war even after this guy is in office. The new US-backed leader rules brutally for 8 years, until he's eventually overthrown by a military officer, and in 2013 he was charged with crimes against humanity, torture, and war crimes.
My lord.
Okay, now let's go to this little island in 1983. It's communism again, and the US sends 2,000 troops to invade this small remote island and remove their communist leader. They didn't really know much about this small island, and they literally had to use tourism maps to plan their invasion. Anyway,
oh my God.
American forces move in, overwhelm the Grenadian fighters who happen to be joined by their Cuban allies. The government collapses, and the US-friendly leader comes to power. Okay, back down to Central America. It's 1989, and we're here in Panama, where the US has control of a very important canal. And luckily, the Panamanian dictator has been very friendly to American interests. But the US starts losing confidence in this guy, wondering if he's really the best choice, ensuring the US maintain easy access to their vital canal. Oh, and it didn't help that this guy was indicted in Florida on drug trafficking and money laundering charges. We gotta get him out. But the straw that broke the camel's back for this guy was when Panamanian troops killed an unarmed American soldier in Panama City. The US is done with this guy, so they invade Panama with 27,000 troops. Panama's military is crushed, and the dictator is eventually arrested and sentenced to 40 years in prison. And the US ensures
27,000 troops, my God.
Access to its canal after all. Okay, so now it's the end of the 1980s, and the Soviets are invading Afghanistan. And are meeting resistance from a bunch of fighters from all over the world who have come to Afghanistan to fight back against the Soviet occupation, many of them with fundamentalist religious motivations. But the US doesn't care about their motivation. They just care that they're willing to fight against the Soviets and the Soviets' puppet, the Afghan president. And it totally works. With the help of the US, these fighters push the Soviets back and successfully run the Afghan president out of office. And as he's being run out of office, he forebodingly warns the Americans that if they leave Afghanistan in the hands of these fighters, that it would, quote, be turned into a center for terrorism. And his prophecy was completely fulfilled. Those US-funded fighters were people whose names we know today. Osama bin Laden, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the guy who started the group that would eventually become ISIS. Those same weapons that the US sent to counter the Soviets and to effect regime change in Afghanistan would go on to be used against American soldiers years later, when the US was back, orchestrating yet another regime change after 9/11, against the very groups they once enabled. The US would eventually leave Afghanistan, only to find the country immediately falling back into Taliban rule.
That's crazy.
We're almost to the end of our list, and we're now in modern day. It's 2003, and 150,000 American troops invade Iraq. They say that they are there to find and destroy weapons of mass destruction. But their main focus is taking out this guy, Saddam Hussein, which they do in a matter of weeks. Saddam fleeing into hiding, and President Bush declaring mission accomplished, establishing an American-friendly government in Iraq, creating once again a negative byproduct by alienating huge swaths of the Iraqi people and army who form a bunch of anti-American rebel groups that go on to fight against the American occupation, some morphing into groups like ISIS who wreak all kinds of havoc on the region to this day. Once again, I made a whole video about this topic, go check it out. Iraq remains a place of deep political instability. Trust in government is extremely low. And the question of how and why we did this expensive, horrific, destructive coup is still something that there aren't really good answers to. Again, you can go watch my video for more on that. And this gets us to the final coup on our list. It's 2011 during a wave of protests spreading throughout this region, trying to take down all these strongmen dictators, one of which was this guy, Muammar Gaddafi, the same Gaddafi we were talking about earlier who's like taking over Chad. He's still here, and he's still a very horrible dude. And there's worry that he's going to potentially massacre all of these pro-democracy protesters. So the US feels like it must get involved to save these protesters. They rally their NATO allies to help them. But at some point, the mission switches to total regime change. We don't know exactly how this happened. Only the people in the room do. But is it surprising? We've seen this long arc of the US using the coup as a force for getting their way in an international conflict. It's a tried and true tool in the American foreign policy toolkit. So it's not surprising that a coup becomes a solution during these difficult decision-making processes. So anyway, the target becomes Gaddafi, and now NATO drones are firing missiles at his convoy, and he eventually gets captured and gets killed on the spot. Libya has been in chaos ever since, but it's not like it was a great place under Gaddafi. And once again, we're in a gray area where we don't know the history that didn't happen, or how things could have turned out different if the US didn't get involved. That debate lives on. Okay, so that's our list.
Bro, all these coups are just absolutely insane to me. Like, the role, with America being so young, the role that they have played in the world is crazy.
These are our coups that we decided to go over in this video. There are so many more that we could have mentioned. My purpose in doing this broad back-to-back history of American-led coups was so that we can see patterns that emerge. How a rising superpower became really good at removing leaders that didn't align with their way of seeing the world. Or, in a lot of cases, who were not friendly to American business interests. But let's be clear, the US didn't invent this. This is something that powerful countries and empires have always done. What characterizes US-led coups, especially during the Cold War, was how the overthrow of these governments often stamped out new democracies, budding democratic movements, replacing them with authoritarian leaders who would go on to oppress the people with the support and backing of the United States, and in the process, redirecting the country's history. Lately, Russia has been meddling in the election process of the United States, and I've been reflecting on my feelings towards that. The violation of having an external power, sowing doubt and polarization and fear in my own democracy, in my own society. It feels like such a violation, and it is. This is giving me just a tiny taste of what it feels like to have an outside power pulling the strings in your country, tearing it apart for their own purposes, and in the process creating more problems for the people and for the United States itself, undermining any semblance of democracy or development, all in the name of keeping the US on top and dominant over the globe.
That's crazy, bro. That's crazy, because you you feel sorry for that you're kicking all these presidents and you're having all these coups, but the real people that are getting hurt are just the common people in those places, and that's absolutely heartbreaking to see these places that were progressing, and now these people are being oppressed. Now they're regressing, and you honestly hate to see that. That's sick. And then the only question I have is, because America is so young, how did they gain so much power so quickly is what I don't understand. I would love to, like, there's probably videos on YouTube about that, and if y'all could drop them in the comment section, that'll be dope, about how U.S. became like the world's top superpower that quickly. That's all we got. You guys got a favorite video suggestion, you can subscribe to Patreon or drop it in the comment section. Subscribe to the channel, ring notification bell, give the video a thumbs up so it gets suggested. It's your boy Neal, out.